So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get everything unhooked on the suspension here. So we're going to take out this tie rod. You don't necessarily have to if you're just doing the control arms, but I'm also doing the front wheel bearings while I'm here. We're also going to take off the upper and lower ball joints. You're probably going to require a special tool to do that. It's going to be a pickle fork or a separator, one or the other. If you're reusing your ball joint, I really suggest you use a separator, and I'll show you the one that I have, and I'll show the other one with a pickle fork and why I recommend it. If you want to reuse it, get that. We're going to end up taking out the brake caliper. This nut right here is going to end up coming out, so we can get everything off of the knuckle to do our wheel bearings. We got some tins here holding the brake line on. We're going to need to get out of the way. I'm going to need to get a wrench for that. I'm going to go ahead and get those off now, that way I'm not holding the brake caliper here in a little bit and having to wrestle with those. It just kind of threads through these two little hooks here. Just going to set that aside for right now. And get us a needle nose and get that cotter pin out. Cotter pin out. Alright, next we're going to take off our caliper bracket. The caliper will stay on it. Now we already have the shock out of the way from our little demonstration there. By the way, I'm probably going to break that off into another video. I'll keep it on here, of course, but break that off into another video by itself because, one, content. Two, it makes a lot easier resource to figure out what tires will fit without a lift, because that's one of the most popular questions in the community is what tire fits without a lift. Definitely one of the most popular questions. That, and what's the wire with the blue tape for? What does the wrench with a 1 mean? All questions that would be answered by your owner's manual. Hey Steve, will you give me those brake caliper hooks on my hutch there? Yeah. So we're just going to hang this guy up and out of the way for right now, somewhere. There for right now until we can get them threaded through. Now this hub will just pull right off. There we go. I'm probably just going to go ahead and take off this caliper guard. Mainly because it'll be easier to film that way. Cutest little, actually I guess it's probably a CV boot guard. Cutest little piece of plastic ever. This guard here, a couple 5mm Allens. I'm going to be taking it over to the press here shortly, so. Yeah, that guy right there. All right, now I remember right because the greaser that I got for this thing actually didn't go over the CV axle. It was too big, or too small. The CV axle's too big. So to grease these wheel bearings last time, what I did was I took off the control arm bolts here, let this whole thing pivot out so I can get the CV axle out of the way to put my greaser in there to grease the bearings. And that's probably what I'm going to do again, because it's really hard to get anything in here to these nuts with the CV axle in the way. And the only way to do that is to slide one or the other out of the way. So I'm just going to start with the top. It's a 14, I believe. You know, before I drop every nut, before I take that control arm off, I'm going to go ahead and separate this tie rod over here. So I'm just going to leave that bolt there for right now. So we've got a cotter pin that we'll pull out. This is one of my favorite separators. It's from a place that doesn't put their name on their tools. I want to say it was like K&K Tools. It's a hydraulic separator. Instead of just turning this guy and using screw force, you get it snug and then you turn this little piston here, which gives you a mechanical advantage at getting this out. So squeeze that guy up in there. Try to get just the tip of the jaw, just the tip, and only for a minute, on the bolt. And once you clamp it down, it'll kind of hold itself. And now I just have to spin that guy. Alright, and we just spin this guy. Pop! Right up out of there. I love this little tool. You can see we don't have any damage to the boot whatsoever. No damage to the threads. It pops right out of there. And it takes almost no effort whatsoever. And you just collapse it back down and move on to the next one. Slide this control arm bolt forward. And this whole thing can pivot forward. I can drop my washers. And in a very difficult manner, I can get that CV axle out of the way and just let them hang. And just so I have something to hold on to, I'm going to put my bolt back in just so it holds it still for me. Flopping around, and now I can get these nuts out. So I'll probably bring you around to the front for that. That'll be... Clean these fellers off so we can actually see those cotter nuts, or cotter pins. You know what I mean. Nineteens. Well, don't you have yourself in a pickle there. Cockroaches want to play rough. There we go. I'm replacing the bearings, by the way. You might want to be kinder to them than I just was. Could just get a swivel in there with an impact, it'd probably come right out, no problem. The top one is a 17, it looks like. Yeah, 17. Hurt yourself on camera, Harrison. It's embarrassing. People are going to laugh at you. I mean, I'd laugh at me. All right, so I'll show you the separator working on the bottom one, hopefully. I don't know, never done that before. Push that boot down. Alright, so we've got her clamped on there. Take our, let's give you a good shot there. How it's clamped onto the ball joint. Now we're just going to crank it on down. She's loose. I changed my mind. I don't want a pickle fork. I just don't feel like hitting things with a hammer today, but you can grab yourself a pickle fork and this is what I mean by pickle fork. This one's honestly probably too big. These are tiny little ball joints. And you're just going to jam it right in there. It's going to destroy your boot. But how hell I'll do it. Fine. Sorry, little ball joint. It's for the people. And she's loose. You can do that. It's kind of violent, as you can see. Yeah, boot's torn right there. So, if you're wanting to, oh wow. Apparently I needed ball joints worse than I thought I did. If you want to do it that way, you can. I don't prefer it. It's violent. Like Gandhi said, there's another way. Alright, so we've got our spindle here. It's completely stripped down. We're going to take this snap ring out. Now, these wheel bearings are not making noise, but I've replaced the backs. And at the time, I didn't have the time to do the front, so I just greased them. But now we're going to go ahead and replace these while we have this all torn apart. And it's going to be the best time to do it. So get your pair of snap ring pliers. You're going to have to wiggle this guy back and forth a bit. Whew. Life flashed before my eyes. Might need to get an edge pried up. Lord, that one's a tight fit. I'm compressing that thing literally ear to ear. That's a stout one. There we go. And now we can just take this over to the press. This one's going to be kind of interesting to sit it on the press. The backs were kind of interesting if you saw in my last video, but it's going to push out that way. I wonder if I've got a cup big enough that can receive that. I guess we'll have to find that out. Alright, so we got our spindle supported by some arbor plates, and we're going to center it up and slowly go with it. Alright, so we got her washed up. We got a decent amount of size plate to match it to where it's hitting the outside of the race. We're going to press her back in. Trying to center this up below this. so it doesn't try to tilt on me. If you've worked a press a lot, you know the sound it makes when it's bottom. If you don't know that sound, go nice and slow, and when things stop moving, you stop too. Alright, so we've got this cleaned up, our snap ring cleaned up. Just got to get this guy back in there. That is a strong snap ring. I'm trying to get one edge in so it doesn't go flying off on me. These are twisting on me. Oh my God. There we go. Whew. Got that guy seated in. I'm going to go ahead and shoot this with some grease with my greaser tool, just because a lot of these bearings just don't come with much grease in them at all. And we can get her put back in there. Alright, so we got some fresh grease on our CV axle here. We got our O-ring back on there. Both ball joints are in. We've got our wheel bearing in. Everything's nice and clean. And make sure you run your caliper through now, otherwise you're going to have to take it all back apart because your caliper won't fit between the gap. And now I can get a torque wrench in here. Bring this guy to the front. I can get a torque wrench in here, hold it somehow, figure that out, and torque these guys down and get the cotter pins in, and then I'll let that control arm swing out again and stab the CV axle in. Alright, so I have a service manual for this machine, and I did the right, proper, responsible thing and forgot it at home. But the kind folks at Shawnee Honda, which have always been good to me, that's actually where I bought this machine at, were kind enough to look up in their service manual and tell me what the torques are. They just told me that the bottom torque for the ball joint is 36 foot-pounds, the upper's 21. That's not a whole lot, but at least it's got a cotter pin. They're working on the tie rod and everything else for me right now, but let's get these torqued down. Like I said, bottom's 36. So we'll get that one done. The new Super ATV one's a 22 millimeter. Alright, so bottom 36. And the upper is going to be 21.
Okay. Yeah, we're just done. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I appreciate it, sir. Thanks, bye.
What did the kind folks at Shawnee Honda say?
For which one?
The control arms and the bracket bolts.
80 on the bracket. The lower control arm is 47, the upper is 36.
You rock. That is not a lot of torque.
Must mean don't take a lot to break that shit.
The four-wheelers were like, what did it say? 20 something, I think's what I saw.
Let's get our cotter pins in
You did
there.
foot-pounds, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure.
Not only an inch.
Alright, so we did our 36 down low. That felt just fine. I was able to get the cotter pin in, no problem. The 21, on the other hand, wasn't even enough to show the cotter pin hole for me. And it just didn't feel like it was snug. So I tightened it down more, and I had to go way past the bottom torque just to be able to fit my cotter pin in the hole, you know, with the washer and everything. I don't know why they did it that way. I mean, That's a question for someone else.
That's a question you should ask China.
So we're just gonna put in on the old cotter pin. I'll definitely keep it from backing out. All right, spin that bad boy back on around, and we're going to take off this bottom bolt. It's been holding it so kindly for us. Which will allow, hopefully, I might take this shock back out. Now let's move it around a bit. There we go. Now, we're going to put it back together. Can't be telling crackhead stories while I'm trying to make a video. All right, so we've got our hub loosely fit on there. Our ball joints are torqued. We have not torqued our tie rod yet, and we're going to go ahead and get our caliper back on here. We cleaned our brake rotor. The reason why we're doing that is because that will help us torque our axle nut. We can put something in the rotor to run up against the caliper bracket, and then we can get that torqued. So we got I've wire brushed the bolts for the caliper bracket.
Blue Loctite.
All right. Now we can start torquing stuff down. What's the torque on it?
80.
80 foot-pounds for the caliper bracket. Really? They get 80, but the ball joint's supposed to get 21?
I didn't write them. You're wrong nut. Wrong nut.
Oh, yeah. You know what helps if you go the right direction? Oh, Tyler, you can't say crap. Tell me how many times I have to correct Tyler. Hey, you're going the wrong way.
Let it go tight enough.
I usually wait until a vein pops out of his head. Like, oh, by the way, you're tightening. Push that brake line out of the way a bit. Alright, so now we can use like a screwdriver in the slots of the rotor, and that'll hold it for us while we tighten down our axle nut. Alright, so the torque on our tie rod is 48 foot-pounds. And 8. And it has a cotter pin. You're going to have to replace that one. Don't reuse the one that you took off. Alright. Yeah, so the tie rod gets 48, but the ball joint doesn't. What? Alright, so we got the torque spec from Oklahoma Honda Suzuki this time. Shout out to them too. They're pretty cool. I totally expected them to charge me because every time I go in there they're full of douche canoes, but there's your shout out. You get it. So we're just going to take a screwdriver into one of the slots on the rotor. Maybe. All right. Torque this down to 101. Alright, got our cotter pin in. Bring those guys around. Alright. We've got our caliper bracket torqued. We've got, and that's Loctited. We've got our tie rod torqued with a cotter pin in. Upper and lower ball joints are torqued, and our CV axle is torqued. Alright guys, I hope you guys like that one. If you did, like, comment, and subscribe to follow us for more, and we'll see you on the next one.